Department of Transportation, Federal Aviation Administration, 14 CFR Parts 1, 47, 48, 89, 91, and 107. Docket number FAA-2019-1100, notice number 20-01, RIN 2120-AL31. Remote Identification of Unmanned Aircraft Systems is now in session. Stay tuned. Hey, what's up guys, and welcome back to My Drone Chronicles. And if this is your first time here, you might want to think about hitting that subscribe button down there if you like talking about drones or tech or what's coming up or what's coming out. Anyway, with that said, I'd like to throw a big thank you, a big shout out to everyone out there that helped make My Drone Chronicles turn 1,000 subscribers. That's right, My Drone Chronicles hits 1,000 subscribers. Never thought I'd see that. This is just something I do for fun. I love it. I love the hobby. I love the community out there. So thank you, thank you, thank you, and here's to 1,000 more. Okay guys, so you're probably thinking, remote ID, yeah, we've heard that before. What's going on with that? Well, in my opinion, I don't think you've heard it enough, because I see people out there talking about it's going to go away, or it's just going to go back and forth, it's going to linger on, blah blah blah. I don't think so. I mean, this, in my opinion, this is happening, and it's going to happen sooner rather than later. Because yeah, that's right. I've printed out the thing. I made a binder just for this damn thing, read through it, back and forth and back and forth. They've got so much crap in here. They repeat the same shit over and over again, and if you haven't read it, there are things in there that you probably don't know and probably not aware of. Maybe you are. But I've come across a lot of things that I think that you might need to know. If you haven't read this thing, and if you just listen to some of the comments and what things that people saying, there's, you know, you're not going to be aware of all this going on. So I've made some notes of some things I want to go over with you, so that you have a better understanding and a better basis for making your comments on the site when needed. First of all, we are going to go over the basics again, just because. There are two levels of compliance. One is standard and one is limited. Now with the standard, your system as a whole has to be able to transmit your ID info to the internet and broadcast it. Now with limited remote ID, your system only has to be able to transmit the data to the internet. However, that leaves your system only the ability to fly 400 feet away from your controller in all directions. Now, if your drone or UAS is not compliant, meaning that you can't transmit or you can't broadcast, the only thing you'll be able to do is fly your drone in a drone park. You can't take your drone, you can't take your little spark baby here, you can't take him out in your backyard and fly him and take some photos of your kid's birthday or whatever, because, you know, it's not compliant. However, there's some more about that I'll bring up later. Now, registration. They're changing some things with the registration. Now, any drone over 0.55 pounds has to be registered individually, and that's going to cost you more, and I'll hit on that later too. So what do you got to register? Well, you got to register the serial number. You got to be provided a serial number for your drone now, manufacturer, model, basic contact info, including a phone number too. Now, if your drone is used for Part 107, it doesn't matter how much it weighs, you have to register it. And if the serial number of your drone is not ANSI CTA 2063-A compliant, and the manufacturer, say DJI, can't send you an update to make it so, then you're stuck in a drone park again. So that kind of sucks. I mean, that's another thing that's kind of iffy, and it shouldn't be that way. And you might be wondering, what the heck does that stand for? Well, I couldn't find an example, but it stands for American National Standards Institute Consumer Technology Association Standard 2063-A. That's what that means. So let's look at some of the guidelines here. Now, for a standard remote ID UAS, it needs to transmit the info from takeoff to landing. Now, drones are to be designed, now this is in the rule, drones are to be designed by the manufacturer so that if the internet is available and it can't transmit the data to a USS, and we'll cover that too, you can't take off. If the internet is not available, the drone can still take off if it can broadcast its data. And as you can see here, broadcast is defined as using radio frequency spectrum. So, limited remote ID UAS. Same thing, it needs to transmit the info from takeoff to landing. Drones are to be designed so that if the internet is available and it can't transmit the data to a USS, you can't take off. If the internet is not available, the drone still can't take off because it's unable to broadcast its info. And that even applies if you are flying at a drone park. So if you have a drone that is either standard or limited compliant, and you take it to a drone park but you can't connect to anything, you still can't fly. So that's kind of iffy too. So transmitted data, where does it all go? Well, I'll tell you. It goes to remote collection agencies called a USS. And that stands for UAS Service Supplier. What they are third-party companies that will need to be approved by the FAA to collect and store the data for no more or less than 6 months. So when you take off, before you take off and you start transmitting that data on that flight, they're going to save your flight data for 6 months. And then this will most likely cost you a monthly or a yearly fee. Right there. So let's take a look at this table. I got this table here. There's a few differences, not much, but there's some differences in between the standard and remote ID, what is there. So if you look at this table, you can see the UAS identification serial number or session ID unmanned aircraft. So you got your standard on the left and your limited on the right. Yes, you have to transmit that, both of them. Latitude and longitude, barometric pressure, altitude, yes for standard and no for limited. Which that doesn't really make sense because, you know, if you can get if the info's coming back to your controller, you should be able to transmit that, but whatever. The control station, latitude, longitude, barometric pressure, altitude of the control station, which is, you know, your controller. Yes, you have, for both, you have to transmit that data. A time mark, UTC time, you have to transmit that. An indication of the emergency status of the UAS, and what they're talking about there is whether everything is functioning correctly, you know, whether it's broadcasting if it is, or transmitting if everything is okay. They want to know that. And here it goes over connectivity prior to takeoff, internet and remote ID. Yes, it wants to know that. Broadcast, obviously yes for standard, no for limited. If at takeoff the UAS can't connect to the internet, with standard you can broadcast and still take off. With limited you can't take off. If at takeoff the UAS is connected to the internet but is not transmitting the remote ID USS, you cannot take off. Even if you can broadcast, you can't take off. And for both. You can't take off. In-flight loss. Here's some things here. If during the flight the UAS loses connection to the internet or stops transmitting to the remote ID USS, with standard you can continue to broadcast and continue your flight. With limited, you have to land. During the flight, a UAS uses its ability to broadcast the message elements. You must land as soon as possible, and it's not available for the other one because it doesn't broadcast. Range limitations from the control station, none if you're a standard, but you have to comply with the regular rules for that. With limited, again, there you are at 400 feet. Broadcast limitation, there it says standard remote identification unmanned aircraft must broadcast remote identification message elements, and a limited one cannot. Okay, so a USS or UAS service supplier, what the FAA envisions them to be. A USS can be a third-party, private or government agency. They don't have to offer their service to the general public. They don't have to provide a service that is universally compatible with all other drones. Drone manufacturers can apply to be a USS, and in that scenario, DJI could be a USS to users of their drones, and in turn could provide that service for free or not. So you're probably thinking, why would they not have to offer their service to the public? Well, the FAA thinks that there are some companies out there that do drone work, that they're big enough that they will become a USS, and they'll only become a USS for themselves. So I don't know. We'll have to see how that goes. Also, privacy. Well, what can we expect? The FAA will consider the data provided to a USS as publicly accessible. That's right. However, there might be other information provided by a USS on another service they would provide that would not be public. But so yeah, there's some other worms in there too. I mean, they're talking about these service suppliers that have different packages and different costs, but yet they come up with a basic cost. I'll go over that later. It's a little crazy, Okay, so I'm going to read something here to you that they actually wrote in this proposal. It's like a little scenario about somebody using a drone and how they envision the rules to work. So check this out. Patty has a photography business and has decided to purchase a UAS to take aerial photos for weddings and other events. She researched different types of UAS and their capabilities and determined that she needs a UAS that can operate more than 400 feet from its control station. Patty decides to buy a standard remote identification UAS because the UAS has standard remote identification. It is designed to 1. Connect to the internet and transmit remote identification message elements through that internet connection to remote ID USS, and 2. Broadcast the same message elements directly from the unmanned aircraft. Patty sees that the UAS she wants to buy has a label that says it is standard remote identification UAS. Regardless, Patty checked the FAA's website to confirm that the UAS she is buying has a valid FAA accepted declaration of compliance. Because the UAS was listed on the FAA website, the UAS meets the requirements of Part 89. Patty intends to operate her UAS for business purposes, so the operations are subject to the operating rules in 14 CFR Part 107, which require her to register the unmanned aircraft with the FAA. Patty goes online to the FAA Drone Zone website, applies for and is issued a certificate of aircraft registration under Part 48. As part of the application process, Patty submits her unmanned aircraft's serial number because Patty is required to register unmanned aircraft under Part 48. She is subject to the remote identification operating requirements in Part 89. Patty then subscribes online to Alpha Inc., an FAA qualified remote ID USS. Her UAS is designed to connect to the internet by automatically pairing with her personal smartphone when the phone is running an application provided by Alpha USS. Each time Patty uses her UAS, it automatically transmits the standard remote identification UAS remote identification message elements through the internet connection to Alpha USS. Patty chooses to use her unmanned aircraft serial number for the UAS identification message element, but in the future, she may instead choose to use a session ID assigned by Alpha USS. Sometimes Patty's UAS loses its internet connection while she is operating in rural areas. She can continue the operation as long as the unmanned aircraft is still broadcasting the remote identification message elements. During one operation, Patty's UAS indicated that due to a malfunction, the unmanned aircraft was no longer broadcasting the message elements, at which point she landed the unmanned aircraft as soon as practicable. During a different operation, Patty's UAS attempts to connect to Alpha USS at the time of takeoff, but Alpha's remote identification service is unavailable because Alpha's server is down. Patty's UAS can still connect to the internet through her smartphone, and she discovers that an alternate FAA qualified remote ID USS, Bravo Inc., is available. Patty's UAS connects to Bravo Inc. and she is able to fly her UAS. Patty's subscription with Alpha USS provides for a roaming feature that allows her to connect to another available USS free of charge so she can have uninterrupted service. If her subscription did not provide this roaming feature, Patty would have had to pay any associated fees directly to Bravo. This is because if any remote ID USS is available, even if it is not the one she is contracted with, her UAS is designed to connect to it through the internet. As long as she can connect to the internet, it is incumbent on Patty to connect to a USS. Only when the UAS cannot connect to the internet would the unmanned aircraft be able to take off while only broadcasting. On another occasion, Patty is unable to connect to Alpha Inc. at the time of takeoff due to a disruption in Alpha's service, but Bravo is also experiencing problems. There are no other publicly available remote ID USS because Patty's UAS is designed not to take off when it has access to the internet but is not connected to a remote ID USS. Her unmanned aircraft would not take off. Her service would be interrupted until Alpha, Bravo, or another publicly available USS became available. So, yeah, that kind of sucks. I mean, again, you could see the reasons for having some of this, but getting down to the nitty-gritty there, you know, you pay for your drones, you pay for licenses, you pay for subscriptions, you pay for services, you pay for things you're doing to operate your business. You go out, you're on site, and you can't take off for a number of reasons. But it's going to get tough. It's going to get tough, but it is coming. Now, there are some other things in here that I've pulled out that thought you should know. So how much is this going to cost? Like, you know, subscriptions and all that, blah blah blah. Well, they have these estimates right in this plan. So they say a subscription to Remote ID USS may range in cost from $0 to $5 per month per operator, for a midpoint of $2.50 per month. So they think it's going to cost you $2.50 a month to register your drones, you know, with one of these USS providers. I don't know. There's other places in there where they talk about they might have different levels, and I'll get to that in a little bit too. I don't know. Those numbers seem kind of low. I mean, per month, it's every month though. Think about it. But at least they're saying per operator and not per drone. That could be bad. then it's written in there, for purposes of this regulatory evaluation, the FAA determines that each operator of a standard remote identification UAS or limited remote identification UAS would be required to subscribe to Remote ID USS at a fee of $250 per month. Based on the compliance dates for the rulemaking, the FAA determines that an app to connect standard remote identification UAS and limited remote identification UAS to a Remote ID USS would be available at the start of year 2 of the analysis period. Now that's year 2 of the 3 years. But then they talk about 10 years in this analysis period. I'm not sure where that comes from. Anyway, something else about your community-based organizations and applying to be a drone park. So the FAA finds that CBOs, community-based organizations, can begin to identify flying sites that they may wish to apply to have established as FAA-recognized identification areas immediately. This proposal allows time for the CBOs to evaluate their needs and organize their applications for establishment of their flying sites as FAA-recognized identification areas. For that reason, the proposal includes a 12 calendar month period after the effective date of the rule to make that application. Applications made before the effective date of the rule or after the effective date, after the 12-month period, would not be considered. So, you know, what they're saying here, a couple years down the road, there's no communities anywhere in the United States that can apply to be a drone park. That's kind of odd. I mean, that's not too good. Here's a fun fact here too. The FAA estimates that potentially as many as 157 U.S. and 324 foreign producers would submit a declaration of compliance for 313 U.S. and 787 foreign models of UAS for FAA acceptance by year 1 or 2 of the analysis period, depending on their ability to retrofit. That's something else I'm going to be bringing up. Retrofit. So, based on industry information and market research, the FAA estimates at least 93% of the current Part 107 fleet and at least 20% of the current recreational fleet would be eligible for retrofits, thus minimizing the cost for operators and producers. So basically what they're saying is, and I hope it's true for this, and I'm sure it is, the Mavic 2 Pro will be capable of being retrofit to be compliant. Okay, so here's something else. The FAA assumes that 5% of the declarations of compliance submitted by persons responsible for the production of standard remote identification UAS and limited remote identification UAS to the FAA would not be accepted. 5%. The declaration of compliance would then be rewritten and resubmitted to the FAA for acceptance, and the FAA would accept the resubmission. I don't know. Whatever. Now here's where it gets kind of dicey when we talk about these companies that might become a USS but not supply it to the public. The FAA estimates that 10 entities will request to become Remote ID USS, and 9 of the entities will be approved. How do they know that already? 9 will be approved by the FAA by the end of year 1 in the analysis period. For each of the 9 remaining years of the analysis period, so now here's where that 10-year period comes in, the FAA assumes 1 additional entity will request to become a Remote ID USS annually, which will then be approved by the FAA. So basically, to me, what they're saying here is in the start of this, they're only going to approve nine companies to do this all over the United States, and that's it. And then they won't approve any more till, you know, like a yearly process. So that seems like it could be a problem. Oh yeah. Recreational flyers will also be required to pay a $5 registration fee to the FAA for each additional aircraft registered. So if you got 10 drones, it's going to cost you $50 to register those drones. Assumptions. FAA is making assumptions? Well, yeah. They assume that individuals want to operate a U.S. without remote identification within a drone park. They assume that. That's what I say to that. And here's something you might not know, but the FAA was considering not designating places to fly your drones that don't meet the registration. And what they said was, should the FAA not allow FAA recognized identification areas, drone parks, for the operation of UAS without remote identification, it is estimated that as many as 400,000 drones that are used for recreational flying would be grounded at the end of the year. How is all this going to pan out? Well, you've heard the 3-year thing about 3 years. Oh, it's going to happen in 3 years. Well, it's only going to happen in 3 years from the time that it's accepted. So yeah, if people fight enough, you know, maybe it'll push it out some, but I don't think that's going to happen. But anyway, there's a table here that shows some of the things that need to happen in this timeline. So if you look at it here, you see any non-exempted unmanned aircraft weighing more than 0.55 pounds must have an FAA accepted declaration of compliance. And that deadline is 2 years. First day of the month following 24 months after the effective date. So when it's approved, by the end of 2 years, the drone has to have that compliance registered. Then we got here serial number added to the unmanned aircraft registration and requirement to remotely identify, and that's first day. That's at the end of the time. That's 3 years. 3 years out. At the end of 3 years, that has to be done. Serial number of any UA required to registered must be listed on the FAA accepted declaration of compliance, or the UA can only be flown within an FAA recognized identification area, which is a drone park. And submit an that's the first day. That's at the end too. 3 years. The end of 3 years. And then submit an application for establishment of FAA recognized identification area, which means a community-based organization can apply to be a drone park, if you want to call it that, but they can only do it within the first 12 months of this plan. Once this is approved, they have 12 months to get all their crap together to apply for that, or it's done. So then you say, well, I don't want to comply. What can happen? Well, if an operator is unwilling or unable to comply, or is deliberately flouting regulations, you could get fined. Yeah, well, how much could that possibly be? Well, according to the FAA, $1,466 for an individual, or $33,333 for large companies. And there could also be civil penalties up to $20,000. Where do they come up with them numbers? Where $1,466? 33,330. I mean, I don't know where they come up with these numbers. That's just crazy. But that's what they say can happen. Yeah, so I don't know, guys. If you want to know more, hit me up in the comments. I'll be more than happy to go through some of this book, if you want to call it, this novel that I've acquired here for the purpose of enlightening you guys or informing you guys. There's all kind of stuff in here. There's all kind of cost analysis for this and that, and it's just pretty crazy. But again, from reading through it, kind of back and forth and stuff, you know, there are some things that are iffy, but for the most part, and I can see the need for some of this stuff. It's not really that far-fetched, so it's going to happen. So just let me know what you think. I mean, you think it's going to destroy the hobby? You think it's just going to, you know, damper it a bit, or what? I mean, you know, honestly, I can see some of the cheaper manufacturers that are, you know, throwing these cheap drones out there, you know, just to make a few bucks. I could see them, you know, those kind of things going away, because, you know, and again, unless they're just, you know, making them for the parks, that's about all they're going to use for. But I don't know. I think we'll get by. You know, I think we'll manage. I think some of these drones here, like your Mavics, a lot of the DJI stuff, I mean, you know, some of the things that they're talking about, DJI is basically doing that themselves. They're even proposing some of this this stuff themselves. So I'm not worried too much about these drones right here. But anyway, like I said, give me your thoughts. I really want to know what you guys think. And yeah, so anyway, if you like what you see here and you like the things I'm talking about, let me know by hitting that like button down below and subscribe to my channel. And as always, thanks for watching. Later. There are two levels of compliance. One is standard and one is limited. Now with the standard, your system as a whole has to be able to transmit your ID info to the internet and broadcast it. Internet? What's the internet?